Hello, everyone, and welcome. Welcome back, seeing some familiar faces. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. We've still got people joining. Hey, Victor, what's up? Nice face mask. Excellent. All right, so I'm just letting people join. All right, so for those of you who were not here for our first session, my name is Melissa. I am the founder of the Ultimate Athlete Project, and I'm here today with Dan Bannoura, who's going to be talking about social justice and ultimate Palestinian perspective on the intersectionality of spirit of the game and the struggle for justice. So I'm super stoked about this. Before we get started, I just want to let you know that we will do a Q&A after the presentation. So if you have questions that come up during the presentation, it'd be great if you could write them down before you forget them. And then at the end, then I'll either read the questions or I might invite you on to ask the question verbally. Also, while you're here, if you want to turn your camera on, that'd be great, because it's just more fun for presenters to see that they're talking to actual people. And also just cool to see you all, and I like waving at you and having you wave back. So that's great. Yeah, actually, before we get started, how about just put in the chat box, just let us know where you're from, and if you were at the first session. That would be cool. So you can put that in the chat. And then I'm going to introduce Dan over here. So let's see if I can do that. All right. So Daniel is from Bethlehem, Palestine. He's a PhD student at the University of Notre Dame. He's the founder of Ultimate Palestine, the Palestinian Association for Ultimate. So he's competed in a number of Ultimate Championships in the USA and the Middle East, and he's organized a number of Ultimate tournaments in Palestine. Currently, he's working on the official Arabic translation of the 2021 WFDF Ultimate rules. That is amazing. All right, Daniel, take it away.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm kind of humbled. I'm excited to be with you, to see so many of you. I'm seeing some of my friends. Some friends are showing up as well, and I'm seeing some new people that I don't know. So I'm very happy to have you here with me in this kind of presentation as I share about my experience and about Ultimate Palestine and what we have been doing and how we have been wrestling with our identity as a sports organization, but also as a sports organization that is in a context of social injustice and occupation. I'm gonna speak for hopefully 40 minutes. We in the Middle East are not really good with timekeeping, so hopefully I'll stick to 40 minutes. I'll make sure, hopefully, I'm sure Melissa will kind of keep me in check here. But I'll talk for 40 minutes or so about the issue that I'm going to discuss, and then hopefully I'm excited to share conversation with you and questions and answers and reflecting on this issue of sports and politics. So let me now share the screen. Hopefully this can work well. Melissa, how am I doing?
Yeah, looks good.
Screen, right?
Perfect.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, so the topic is the spirit of the game and social justice, a Palestinian perspective. Before I start with the conversation, let me just tell you briefly about myself. I am Palestinian. I was born in Jerusalem, grew up in Bethlehem, but also spent a lot of time in the US. In the year 2004, I was living back in Bethlehem, and I started playing Ultimate Frisbee with my friends. I had started playing Ultimate in the US at the University of Florida, where I was doing my undergraduate studies. And then 2014, I started playing with some friends, and then eventually founded Ultimate Palestine as the association to represent Palestinians who play the sport of Ultimate. I had been the president of Ultimate Palestine since then. And then in 2020, last year, we had elections, and then I stepped down from my leadership position at Ultimate Palestine and moved now to the US. I am living now in South Bend, Indiana, where I'm doing my studies, my PhD studies at the University of Notre Dame. I'm now a member of also the Ultimate Palestine Advisory Board. Some of the board members are here with the call as well. And we're working with our players on the ground to see how we can encourage them and support them, but also creating some kind of networks here in the US and try to find a way to help and encourage our players, especially through connections and networks with American athletes and players. So something you would be interested in doing, please talk to me at the end or shoot me an email, and then we can talk about how we can work together to support the work of Ultimate Palestine and our players. As for my presentation, I'm going to keep it simple, and it's going to be also intense at the same time. I was talking to Melissa before the presentation that I was worried that it's going to be very politically heavy. Most of you, all of you are coaches. Probably politics is not really a main interest of yours, but I felt it was necessary for me to engage with the political reality because the complexity of life in Palestine animates a lot of what we do when it comes to Ultimate and sports. And an adequate knowledge of what's happening on the ground would help me hopefully explain why this issue is important, but also maybe also give you a good perspective of what's happening there on the ground. So I'll deal briefly with Ultimate Palestine as an organization, talk about the political, social context where we live, and then make some concluding reflections about how Spirit of the Game relates to the issue of social justice. I have to make a trigger warning. A few pictures can be violent, only a small number of them. The violence in these pictures is not meant to be gratuitous. I'm not trying to shock you in the pictures, but at the same time, these images, these pictures convey and reflect a violent reality that exists for the Palestinian people. And in order to understand what's happening, the reality on the ground, we have to understand and see them so that we can understand the impact on the people, and specifically for me here on the the Palestinian players, Ultimate players in Palestine. Just a quick assortment of different practices of our players in Palestine. The picture on the top is from a recent hat tournament that actually was organized during the pandemic last year. And we have players from all over the West Bank, and we have also a number of international players as well. The picture on the bottom right is from our players in Beit Sahur, which is a small town by Bethlehem. And the picture here on the bottom left is from our players in Ramallah. We have also been able to do a lot of work in Gaza Strip, and these are some of the pictures of some of the trainings and coaching clinics we've had in the Gaza Strip. This picture here to the top right, that's me in the middle. I led a 3-day coaching clinic for 20 coaches in the Gaza Strip, 10 men and 10 women, and gave them kind of the basics of Ultimate. And these now coaches have been able to do incredible, exciting work in Gaza. For example, the bottom here, playing beach Ultimate on the beaches in Gaza. You know, I'll talk about Gaza in a bit, but there isn't a lot of space available for players in Gaza, but they have the beach. And so Beach Ultimate is going to be a huge kind of venue for Palestinian players in Gaza to play Ultimate. And there is also here at the bottom left, women practice or female practices in Ultimate as well, led by some of our women coaches. Exciting stuff that we're doing. We're facing a lot of challenges for sure as a small fledgling organization. But the culture that we have created and the community we have created through Ultimate has been a wonderful thing to see, especially in the last, as a small organization that has only been functioning and running for the last 6 years. When it comes to Spirit of the Game, the rule that I tried and the coaches, all of us try to work on specifically is to embody the golden rule, to treat others as you want to be treated. And in a way, that has been a huge challenge for us because of this kind of soccer culture, if I can say this, a soccer culture that exists in Palestine of bickering, of yelling, of shouting, which is kind of common in many areas. but particularly in Palestine, we realize a lot of our players have not really learned the skills to engage with conflict in a healthy and constructive way. And I'm using the word conflict here intentionally because conflict could be manifested in different ways. But interpersonal conflict has been a big challenge for us as we instill a culture of the sort of the game for our players. And here we're trying to deal with two kinds of violence: internal endemic violence that we see in communication, in dealing with conflict, in dealing with fouling, but also external violence that is also forced on the Palestinian people. And it was very quick for us to realize that the socio-political and economical realities and that violence that exists in the larger society has played a huge role in the internalization of violence, and that had played itself out in many ways on the field as well. And so the challenge for us as coaches is to create that culture where spirit of the game becomes the core tenet of our practice, teaching our players to disagree well, to listen to each other. When a foul is called, for everyone necessarily to stop playing and then by stopping, they also are now required to also listen to the other person. And through that, the focus has been to create a system of equity and a system of respect for our players, especially for the women in our teams, especially as you might know, the Middle East and many areas tend to have to be a patriarchal society where men have the power. And so Ultimate is an incredible sport in the way that it is able to break these boundaries of social boundaries that exist in issues of gender and sexism. And all of you are aware of the power that the spirit of the game and Ultimate play in destroying these systems of oppression and violence that exist in the society. Through that, the foundational thing for us was to create leaders, not only players. Because if we are looking for sustainability, fundamentally sustainability has to happen through raising leaders where we do not depend on the patronage on well-meaning and friends of ours who are coming from overseas, but actually that we have this grassroots movement of raising our own leaders who are stepping up and creating sustainability and growth, natural growth for the ultimate scene in Palestine. However, unfortunately, all of this cannot happen in a vacuum. And sport, as much as sport and ultimate can be that escape, can be an escape of us to leave our stress and busyness aside and go and enjoy community and enjoy sports together. We have been constantly reminded that we cannot actually divorce our reality from playing sports. And so here, I'm just going to give you a quick, brief history of Palestine. And hopefully, if you can understand what's happening in Palestine, hopefully now we can make a connection of how do we connect sports here with a political reality. This is the map or the maps of Palestine. If this is confusing to you, I'm going to deal with this quickly. But if you have any questions about what I'm saying politically, please ask me at the Q&A section. Palestine looked like on the far left. This is what we call historic Palestine. This is what Palestine looked like. It was fundamentally, for the most part, occupied, lived on by native Palestinians. And these could be Muslim Palestinians who were the majority of Palestine, and a small, sizable Christian minority, and also a small number of Jewish residents, whether Eastern Jewish inhabitants of Palestinian Jews, or also European Jews who have been moving to Palestine through a system of immigration that was developed and expanded through Zionism, the rise of Jewish nationalism, and the ambition for the Jewish people to create a homeland for them in Palestine. Attempts have been made to split Palestine between the Jewish migrants and the Palestinians, eventually with the Peel Commission partition plan, and then eventually in the 1947 partition plan, where the majority of Palestine would be given to the Jewish migrants, to the Jewish people, and the Palestinians would be squeezed into this space here in the green. That plan did not work out. The Palestinians, for the most part, rejected any partition of the land, because any partition of the land had been seen by the Palestinians and continue to be seen by the Palestinians as a colonial project, where foreign forces come and control the land and the identity of that land. And this has been the story for many people groups and indigenous populations, whether it's Native Americans in the US, First Nations in Canada, or other people groups around the world. Eventually, by the year 67, after the establishment of the State of Israel, Palestine was reduced to what we call the West Bank over here, and the Gaza Strip over here. And the vast majority of the land now is controlled by the newly established State of Israel. Last year, President Trump, previous president of the US, proposed the Trump plan, which looked like this, where Israel would have even more control over the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and then Palestinians would be administered in a hand-to-stand system, in a ghetto system, where the infrastructure, the boundaries, the air, and the water is controlled and managed by the Israeli military. There's a lot to say about this system of control of the land. Fundamentally, this is a system of apartheid and settler colonialism.
I'm sorry. That statement is fact.
Noam, we can talk at the end, but let me please finish my presentation. Thanks for your interest in the issue. Fundamentally, for the Palestinian people, this is a system of apartheid, where the Palestinians are reduced to a managed population that are tolerated as long as they submit to the system, to the reality on the ground. And then the power is given to one ethnic group over the indigenous Palestinian population. Now, to zoom in to the West Bank, where I live, now Palestinians today, let me see if I can go back. Palestinians today live in different areas here. We have 20% of the Israeli population is a Palestinian population called Arab Israelis or Palestinian Israelis. And then we have Palestinians living in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, and also in the Gaza Strip. Let me now tell you, let me just kind of zoom into the West Bank. This is what the West Bank looks like. Palestinians are living in now the red areas. Here's Bethlehem. This is where I live. We have practices here in Ramallah, and we have also practices outside here in the Gaza Strip. Now to explain to you how politics is inescapable for me as a Palestinian player and a Palestinian coach. We have a practice in Ramallah, and I live here in Bethlehem. If I want to go, and I've done that plenty of times, to play with our team in Ramallah, this should take 30 minutes to go from Bethlehem here to Ramallah. Now, if you're an Israeli citizen, or if you're a tourist, if any of you who goes to the land and who wanna play and who wanna travel from Bethlehem to Ramallah, this should take you 30 minutes. I, as a Palestinian who is indigenous to the land, I cannot go across that area in 30 minutes. I have to drive around here and then go back to Ramallah. This, rather than taking me an hour and a half.
We can't see your, sorry, Daniel, I think you're trying to like point with the mouse, but we can't see your,
okay,
wait, there
sorry.
it is. Okay.
Sorry, yeah, so
right.
Here's Bethlehem and here is Ramallah. And if I'm gonna go from Bethlehem to Ramallah, I cannot go through here because there's this wall that exists in Palestine, separation wall, that separates Palestinians from each other and from the roads that exist in the land. So if you're an Israeli or if you are a tourist, you can rent a car and you can drive from Bethlehem to Ramallah in 20 to 30 minutes. For me as a Palestinian, I have to drive through this area here and go around the wall, rather than taking me 30 minutes, as it would take you as a coach or a player from overseas. It takes me an hour and a half. Here, Hebron is in the south, where we also have a practice there. I'm going to tell you more about Hebron in the next slide. This is what reality looks like for us as Palestinians. This is the wall that I referred to that is splitting Palestinians from Palestinians. And this is what we describe as an open air prison for the Palestinians, where Palestinians do not have what we call the right to movement and are kind of trapped in these open air prison systems. Soldiers at checkpoints with their machine guns or semi-automatic controlling the movement of Palestinians. Also, an active system of demolition of property of homes of Palestinians, who live in areas that are controlled by the Israeli military. And this has been, and this kind of is a very lived and experienced reality for us as Palestinians. The wall is very prominent. We always see the wall and impacts our movement as Palestinians. Here, the bottom is the town of Bethlehem, where I live. And here you see the wall is blocking off Bethlehem, especially the people of Bethlehem from the olive groves here at the bottom, and they don't have access to these lands. This is in Hebron, where Palestinian kids on the way to school are being checked by Israeli soldiers. And here also the Israeli settlements that are built on the Palestinian land. And kind of basically, I know we can talk about the political aspects at the end, but basically making the two-state solution between the two people practically impossible. I want to draw your attention to the kid here, to the Palestinian kid here, and hopefully this could, and the kind of the power dynamic that exists between this kid, who could be an ultimate player, and between the Israeli soldier here in his military gear, controlling the movement of this kid. This power dynamics here animates the relationship between the Palestinians and the Israelis. And so the conversation would be, and I'm going to deal with this briefly, the issue of normalization. What kind of a normalizing relationship could exist between the Palestinian youth and the military system that is controlling these kids? Also think about this kid and his future as someone who is going to grow up and become a contributing citizen in his country. How can he do that? Being living in a context of traumatization and of violence against him and against his body. I've talked about this, but also I would draw your attention also to the Gaza Strip, a small area, 7 miles wide and 30 miles long, but is strangled from land and from sea. It is considered now the third most densely populated polity in the world. And the unemployment is at 40% and is considered the highest unemployment rate in the world. As you can see, there's a military blockade over all of the Gaza Strip that surrounds it from the land here and also from the sea, and Palestinians are limited to their movement there. And this has been considered an illegal blockade of Gaza. The international community has condemned it and demanded the end of the blockade on the Gaza people. Some pictures from Gazan protests, and also the destruction of Palestinian homes in Gaza through the different kind of stages of wars that have been waged on the Gazan people. This has led many organizations to recognize the reality on the ground to be a system of apartheid. The Israeli human rights organization, B'Tselem, just came out a month ago or so in January and recognized that the state of affairs in Palestine, Israel, is a state of apartheid where Jewish supremacy is established over the Palestinian, Palestine, Israel, and the land in general. This has actually, surprisingly, even this kind of news report found its way into CNN, where it was reported in some of the news agencies. Also, something that is relevant to us as well as we think about the vaccine. While Israel has been lauded in the media as a very efficient country in distributing the vaccines to its people, it's also been accused of introducing a system of medical apartheid, not just political apartheid that I have hopefully explained to you well, but also of discrimination in the distribution of vaccines, where the Israeli citizens are given the vaccines, while the Palestinians living in the West Bank and Gaza Strip are still denied access to the vaccines. We have been seeing some good stuff, developments of some vaccines entering into Palestine, but for the most part, Palestinians have been denied access to vaccines. If you've heard the term medical apartheid before, the term actually comes from a book that was published in 2007 by Harriet Washington, who documents the medical experimentation on African Americans, whether it's the experimentation on slaves. You might have heard of the Tuskegee syphilis study that was done on Black Americans, or the radiation experimentation that happened even in the 20th century. The history of racist discrimination that existed in the US and even continue to exist in the US is actually a prime reason that even today, many Black Americans, many people of color in the US are still very reluctant in getting the vaccine, the COVID vaccine, because of that legacy of discrimination, of racism that even entered into the ethical practice, the medical practice. And so this is something that has been experienced by Black Americans of this discrimination, and also that today is still being experienced by the Palestinian people in the Palestinian lands. And so, if you have been seeing pictures from the insurrection of last year, it is not surprising for me as a Palestinian, at least, to see Israeli flags that are being waged during that insurrection. And here we see the similarities between the racist history that exists in the US and also the racist policies in Israel. And so it is not surprising to see this kind of connection that could exist, where anti-democratic and fascist ideologies unite people, many of the people that were present at the insurrection and otherwise. This is not to say that all Israelis support this system. Actually, we have incredible amount of players, Israeli players, who are supportive of what we're doing, and actually politicians and commentators and political theorists who are working against the system of racism that exists, and looking alongside Palestinians of their, who share with them that vision of peace and of equality from covering all the land in Palestine and in Israel. This is heavy stuff, and I realize that this might be shocking and confusing, and there's a lot. And we heard an interruption earlier that people disagree with this stuff. I get it, and I welcome the dissent and I welcome disagreement. But here's also a collection of many books that have been written by Palestinians, by Jewish Israelis, by Jewish Americans, by many who have been trying to engage with this issue and think of the reality of the system that exists in Palestine and Israel, and try to forge a way forward of a system and a life that provides dignity, security, and justice for both people and the land. Here, out of this list, I'll provide this for you in the files of my presentation, but I would like to highlight one book that I just got, actually, written by Mark Lamont Hill. If you know, he is a professor here in the US, and he's active a lot in the Black struggle in the US. And he's written this book that just came out like a week ago about the issue of Palestine and the kind of the limits of progressive policies, where the system reality in the US has limited the conversation on justice and equality for Palestinians within the American political reality. I'm also gonna, in the notes, I'm gonna provide for you some videos that would help you kind of think more about the history of the conflict and what's happening now today on the ground. Okay, this is too much perhaps for you, and it's like many of you are saying, wait, what am I doing here? This is not for me. I am a coach. I just want to play Ultimate and learn how to do Ultimate well. And I get it, and I'm sorry if this has been too frustrating or too confusing for you, but at the same time, I'm saying this and I want to share this with you because I want you to understand why this is relevant to you as a coach as well, especially wherever you are, especially how this can impact your players that you're playing with. And here we have to understand the connectedness of the struggle, that it is not just an outlandish, something that is happening in the Middle East, a very confusing and violent place, but all of us in our humanity, we are connected in what we call the internationalism of the struggle. But all of us are connected in the struggle for justice, whether it is in the US, whether it's in Palestine, whether it's in Yemen, whether it's the farmers in India. All of us are connected for our struggle for freedom and for dignity. And I'm reminded here by this incredible quote by Dr. King here. I'm sure all of you know Dr. King. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. All of us are connected in that struggle for justice. And many steps have been made to make a connection, a clear connection between the Palestinian issue and also the Black or the African American issue in the US. And you can see in the picture here, when I as a Palestinian and many Palestinians, when we saw the pictures of the killing of George Floyd, we instantly made the connection between that killing of George Floyd and the abuse of Palestinian children and the killing of Palestinians by the Israeli military. And connections have been made, and I can recommend a book by Angela Davis that is starting to make that conversation about Ferguson, about Palestine, and about the constant struggle that unites all of us in the US and also in Palestine. Also, an issue that is very sensitive and very important for me as a Palestinian is an issue of Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, and how violence and how these systems have emboldened extremist and racist voices on either side of the spectrum, where the struggle of the Palestinians has been, the oppression of the Palestinians has been justified through Islamophobia, through fear and anger towards Muslims, and how that also, that reality of the ground has also fomented anti-Semitism. And the problem for me when it comes to anti-Semitism is, if we have learned anything from the Holocaust, if we have learned anything from the struggle of the Jewish people for freedom, it is that we cannot tolerate oppression and violence of people because of who they are, because of their ethnicity or their religion. The reality on the ground in Palestine is creating this system where a Jewish state is now responsible for the oppression of the Palestinians, and therefore the connection between Zionism as a political system and anti-Semitism is made, where now Israel is practicing an apartheid system, and therefore making the connection for many people that Zionism or Jewish people are inherently bad people who justify oppression for people. And so as we fight for justice, we are fighting Islamophobia, we're fighting hatred of people who are identified as Muslims, and we're fighting at the same time anti-Semitism that wants to paint a wide brush against Jewish people to be responsible for apartheid, to be responsible for the subjugation of Palestinians. And so we need to be aware of how these systems of oppression and how Islamophobia and anti-Semitism and every kind of racism, especially here in the US as well, play into this power dynamic of oppression and violence. And also this is important in how we understand foreign policy and how we understand the role that the US plays in maintaining a system of oppression for the Palestinian people on the ground, whether in Palestine and Israel, or also in around the Middle East and other regions around the world. But now that I've said this, what role can we as coaches play in working with these systems that exist here on the ground? What cannot we do, or how not to do ultimate? What is the best way for us to do ultimate? I think it's been a common theme in the conversation about sports and politics, to think about sports as an escape, as a way for us to not deal with politics and just leave that stuff outside of the door or outside of the field. But the question is then, what are we escaping from, right? Many players in the US or in Palestine cannot really escape racism and discrimination, and we cannot really remove ourselves from the struggles of real life and pretend that we are just gonna ignore all of that and enter into an equal and level playing field. Sticking to sports and shutting up and dribble, these kind of phrases that we hear, do not really work for Palestinians. And we try to do that. And here, sports can be used as a tool to oppress and to silence people. And here, this kind of brings me to a sensitive issue that we in Ultimate Palestine had to deal with, which is the idea of peace. And what does it mean to have peace in Palestine? And we're dealing with this, what we call the peace industry, where peace has been used to silence Palestinians against speaking up about their reality. And we actually have organizations in the land that want to say, hey, let's not discuss politics and let's just play sports. Let's bring Israelis together and Palestinians together and have them play together without any conversation of politics. And actually, political conversation has been actually prohibited or rejected in these kind of systems. And so Palestinians now are forced to say, hey, we need to play with Israeli players. We cannot talk about our reality. We cannot talk about politics. We just have to be friends. We just have to play and have fun together. And here peace, the idea of peace, let's be friends together, is actually used to normalize a system that is not really fair to the Palestinian people. And it's actually been used, peace, a beautiful idea, has been used to silence Palestinians. Many of these organizations also have foreign leadership. So the agenda and the goals of these organizations are actually managed and channeled through a Western and foreign leadership and are forced upon the local populations. And in many ways, this kind of peace industry is saying, hey, we are not going to talk about injustice. We're just going to play sport and have peace through sport without addressing the political reality on the ground and the injustice that a big chunk of our players are dealing with. We try to follow the system. We try to shut up and pass the bit. We try to stick to sports and not deal with the reality on the ground. And this, for us, being aware of the political dynamics, of the power dynamics that exist, we realize we cannot really contend with these powers that exist and just keep our heads down and play sports. And so if I want to go play Ultimate in Ramallah, I'm reminded that I cannot go to Ramallah and play because there's always that system where I'm being picked, where I'm forced to move in a way that I don't want to go. When I go to start practices in Hebron, when we went to start the practices in Hebron, we were stopped by Israeli soldiers because settlers living in settlements were moving around the land, and we were forced to divert our path and take a detour, and we reached the practice an hour later. Why? Not because we left late, because the political military reality impacted the way I do sports. One of our players who actually had been playing in many of these kind of Western organizations that do peace, at some point he was arrested for being involved in protest against the military system. He was going to join us in a tournament that was going to happen in Jordan, in a MENA tournament. He was arrested before the tournament and was not able to go with us to the tournament. He was one of our best players. After he came out of jail 6 months later, I visited him in his small shop in a refugee camp. I should have said this, he's a refugee that lives in Bethlehem, but he actually comes from what is today Israel. And I was talking to him about what happened to him, about his experience, and he was sharing me that traumatizing experience in jail and the beating that he got, and so on and so forth. And I asked him, hey, are you gonna come and join us for practices? And he was like, I can't join you, I can't play Ultimate anymore. I was beaten so badly in jail on my stomach that I actually can't run anymore. I have to have surgery to fix what happened to my stomach. He also then threw this curveball at me, and he said that actually one of his friends that he used to play with, an Israeli friend, was a soldier in the jail where he was. And his friend on the field on that level space is now his oppressor that maintained the violence and oppression that this player had experienced. When it comes to Gaza and the challenges we faced in entering Gaza and the permits we had to apply for and got denied, all of this, the constant violation of the spirit of the game, of the basic rules of Ultimate, continuously happen in our lives as Ultimate players. We could not stick to sports. We realized it is impossible for us to do sports without politics. Necessarily then, any exercise of sports, any exercise of movement, of activity is political. And this is, I hope this is making sense to you here. What I'm saying is not outlandish. This has actually been the staple of sports, particularly for us living in the US, especially in the US. In 1968, in the US, you see Tommy Smith and John Carlos raising a black gloved fist during the playing of the American national anthem during the Summer Olympics in Mexico. In 1980, 66 countries boycotted the 1980 Summer Olympics hosted by the Soviet Union. WNBA players protested the shooting of Jacob Blake and wore a shirt with bullet holes on them. You know what happened with Kaepernick as well with the NFL and how he was kicked out of the NFL because of kneeling down during the national anthem of the US. I'm also thinking here of the Atlanta Dream, an incredible team of players who the team is owned by Kelly Loeffler, who was a senator in the state of Georgia. And the players themselves decided that they're going to vote and advocate and campaign for Warnock, Raphael Warnock, who was running against the owner of the team of the Atlanta Dream. And eventually their activism and their involvement and how they used the platform actually led to Warnock becoming a prominent name in the Georgia politics and eventually removing Loeffler as a senator from Georgia. Here constantly in the US, we're seeing players saying, hey, we are not just here for your entertainment. We also exist in a system that oppresses us, in a political reality that challenges our existence, and we deserve to have our voices heard and need to speak up. And this has been an incredible witness of the power of sports and the platform that sports can play in speaking truth to power and challenging the systems that exist. And this has been done and ultimate as well. And shout out to Molly Brown and a lot of incredible teams in the US that are trying to challenge this separation between politics and sports. And here, this is from a blog that is made by, that is published by Molly Brown. And the link is on the following. The link is on the following slide. But here, one of the players at Molly Brown, Megan Cousins, talks about the refusal as a team to separate politics from playing on the field. And here, just to quickly quote this, what we're looking for, perhaps innocently, is to lose ourselves for a few hours in a world that is absent of the troubles of reality, a place to leave behind politics as if the personal and political aren't inextricably linked, as if the fights for racial justice, reproductive rights, climate change, gun control stop when you step on the field. But athletes do not exist outside of these things. They cannot leave their identity and values at the door when they step on the court. Politics is not an abstract term that we can push to the edges of society. It influences and encompasses everything in our lives. Also, fundamentally, spirit of the game is a political system. The definition of politics per Crick and British political theorists says politics is a distinctive form of rule whereby people act together through institutionalized procedures to resolve differences, to consolidate diverse interests and values, and to make public policies in the pursuit of common purposes. If you think about this quote, you can replace the word politics by the phrase spirit of the game. Spirit of the game is the form whereby we as players regulate the relationship that exists between us in pursuit of the public value and interests of all of the players. Spirit of the game is defined in a way that is inherently political. And so we have to create and imagine a paradigm where spirit of the game happens in a way that brings equity and brings justice to the field. Nothing happens in a vacuum. And I made this statement before. Actually escape, that we can escape our identities as people of color, as women. The idea that we can escape these identities is a privilege. Many people do not have that privilege to escape who they are as people, whether Blacks, women, Palestinians, and so on. And therefore, spirit of the game can be a tool for creating equity, a tool to speak truth to power. We have done this in Palestine, and in my experience as I was trying and helping my players to think about, to practice spirit of the game, the Palestinians have not really been getting used to speaking their truth. Usually rules are forced upon them. And I notice in my players when someone calls foul and I'm saying, hey, everyone, you need to stop talking, stop playing, and listen to the person who claimed the foul. And then that person is now given the opportunity. Everyone else is quiet to speak their truth, to share their perspective. For the Palestinians, they have never been given that chance. They have been continuously vilified, attacked, or at best, just silenced and ignored. And so spirit of the game is now giving the Palestinian players a chance to say hey, can carve a space for myself, and I actually can pursue justice. I can tell about my experience where everyone else is listening to me. Historically, this has not been the case for the Palestinian people. Historically, this has not been the case for many players, women, Blacks, indigenous, and people of color. They have not been carved out the space that was given to them so they can express their voices and their truth. And so we have to actively create a system that creates a level playing field for everyone, where everyone is given the chance to speak truth to power. This also brings the issue of anti-normalization and accountability to my society. When I talk about anti-normalization, I know I need to finish, but this is also a sensitive issue. Can Palestinians play with Israeli players? And this is an important one because it touches on issues of discrimination. It touches on issues of Palestinian narrative and power dynamics and so on. Maybe you can talk about this in the Q&A. But a few days ago, I got this picture from our players in Gaza. The coach in yellow was starting a new practice for players in a school. Probably can't notice this if you do not know Arabic, but there in the background, there's this poster here that says La Littatbi'a in Arabic, which is Arabic for no to normalization, where our players in Gaza are choosing to play in a field that says, hey, we refuse to normalize with a system that has been oppressing us, putting us in a blockade for the last 12 years. Our players are saying, please, Ultimate Palestine, please listen to our experience and realize that normalization, playing as if there's no injustice and there's no imbalance of power, is actually hurtful to us and actually demeans our experience and ignores our experience as people who are living in an unjust reality. And so politics and sports necessarily mix. Why? Because people deserve to show up as who they are. Because if we are gonna bring our players to the field, we're holding each of our players as a person of worth. All of his or her identity is worthwhile and needs to be addressed and engaged with. And here we are not just coaches, and I know and I get it that if this is frustrating to you. We are coaches, yes, but also we are also leaders. And we have to be accountable to our players, especially women, especially people of color here in the US. Political activities influence the treatment of people, wherever they are, especially women, especially people of color, especially immigrants, especially in my case, Palestinians. So what are we doing to create systems of equity and justice among our players? How are we creating systems that speak truth to power and speak truth to injustice and violence that exists? What are we doing as coaches to challenge the systems that exist? How are we addressing the challenges that face our players? How are we actively replicating ourselves and creating a generation of players who are equitable players and fair players on the field, but also passionate advocates for truth and for social justice off the field? And this is kind of my challenge to you as I finish. How can we, as coaches, create this new culture that exists? How can we engage in politics in a new way? And how can we stand in solidarity with our brothers and sisters who are struggling in the US, in India, in Yemen, and also in Palestine? And how are we creating that system of equity and justice also on the field whenever we are throwing the disc to each other? So I'll finish here, and I'm happy now to take your questions. Hopefully this has been exciting or encouraging, and even if it's confusing, I hope at least we can start the conversation and engaging with these issues in a productive and constructive way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel. That was great. So super educational. I really appreciate the depth and the thought that you've put into this. Just a few comments in the chat box. So folks talking about how sports is political. We can either choose to get involved, or if we say silent, that's already a political stance. Yeah, when folks say no politics, what they mean is that we're just upholding the systems and privileges of oppression that are already there. So lots of thank yous coming in now. So your presentation is very much appreciated. So
I just wanna just make that comment. I just wanna make a quick comment that if we are being silent about issues of racism and politics, we are, whether we like it or not, we are participants in racism and of these systems. The systems work because people are maintaining these systems. Our responsibility as coaches is to speak against any injustice that happens on the field and by definition also off the field. So we cannot now, especially after the protests in the US last year, and we see the global movement for protest and for equality, we cannot afford to be silent anymore. And that's why we, especially Ultimate, provides this platform for us that is not available in different sports, in other sports. So please, like, keep thinking about these things and understand that we have to make a stance about these issues. We cannot be silent about them. So sorry, Melissa, but just wanted to make that point.
yeah, that's excellent. I actually want to ask, like, so when you just said Ultimate provides a platform, I think you said something like that isn't available in other sports. What did you mean by that?
So just by definition, Ultimate is breaking a lot of barriers in its focus on gender equality. We still have some issues with that, but the most common form of Ultimate is mixed Ultimate, where women and men are playing together in the field. We still have a disparity in that. The most common format for playing is 5-2, 5 men, 2 women. So the system is still maintaining a minoritization of women, that they are still treated as a minority. But the idea of having mixed teams is in a way deconstructing a lot of the artificial barriers that have been made in sports, where you have male football, you have female soccer, you have all these kind of gender sports. So we have this. And now Spirit of the Game, as a tool where we become self-referees, is also challenging a lot of things. So I'm not gonna have a referee is not gonna just enforce the rule. All of us can enforce the rules together. All of us are responsible to speaking the truth and to be honest, but also to speak up. And all of us have to listen to each other. So what I'm trying to do is like, hey, this happens on the field. Imagine what can happen if we can also be referees outside of the field. How do we create that space to speak up and to speak truth to power outside of the field itself?
Excellent. Do you have any, if you have, by the way, for the audience, if you have questions, please type them in the chat box and we'll get to you. And then Daniel, if I could ask, like, so you talk about, you know, in Spirit of the Game, we're required to listen and then also to self-advocate. Do you have any, anything you'd like to share about the idea of self-advocacy or helping, helping to teach self-advocacy to others?
So here's a progression that I noticed on the field. The first response to the players when I told them about how we do self-refereeing and all that stuff was to revert back to their soccer culture of, hey, I'm gonna shout at each other. So the first instance is when they shout at each other, and then I would have to intervene, like actually run into the field, calm them down, and then explain to them, okay, this is what happened, tell me what happened, okay, here's the resolution. Second step that I noticed is the players learned how to be calm and to listen to each other. But then the default position is like, we're gonna bicker and we're gonna keep shouting against each other. And now at the same, and then when that happens, they would yell at me, hey coach, what do we do now? And so I decided eventually, you know what, when this happens, I'm just gonna turn my face around. I'm gonna just turn my back to them and then kind of force them to deal with it. And that's when kind of the magic happens, when they're shouting at me, I'm not really listening to them. I'm like, okay, well, we have to do something about this. The temptation for many of them had been, you know what, just take this, I don't want it anymore. Even though that person was fouled, because they don't want to create that tension, it's like, okay, here, I'm gonna give you the disc. For me, this reflects the political reality as well, where Palestinians got used to not getting the right. Okay, just take the disc, just take my land from me. There's nothing I can do for myself. And then kind of the challenge has been, it's not just about ending conflict, it's about actually asserting and standing your ground as well. So I noticed this progression. So how this can be done in your own context, it depends on you. It depends on what you are dealing with. But I encourage you to be aware of these issues and kind of insert these issues of conflict resolution skills, of communication skills into your coaching clinics, and give a space for the players to reflect on what happened, and create scenarios where they can optimize the way they think about these things, and think of spirit of the game not just as a thing for working out fouls, but actually how can I use this to work with conflict outside of the field of disagreement among players or in the family or among friends. And I think there's a lot that can be done in that context.
I think what I'm what's coming to mind as you're talking about this is, like, as coaches, it may be important for us to recognize power dynamics that exist off the field, and then how that might influence subtly power dynamics on the field when it comes to calls and discussing calls. I think many women have had the experience of not being listened to, or having teammates come in and argue for us, or just like all this other stuff, which is not quite as the same situation, but it's just another situation where the power dynamic off the field in real life seeps into the field. So, okay, so there was questions about, all right, lots of thank yous. That's great. I appreciate the thank yous. We appreciate the thank yous. So question, is there a national Palestinian team, and do they manage to travel abroad to tournaments?
Yes, great question. So Ultimate Palestine is the official national association. We are registered in WFDF as a provisional association. We finished our full membership application in November or December of last year. So hopefully we'll be becoming normal members, fee-paying members, and we can also contribute in the conversation that is happening in WFDF. We are, okay, again, the question about travel is, like, I was trying, do I give the answer without reference to politics? I cannot. So we have been denied entry to countries because of being Palestinians. A lot of our players who live, the players who live in Israel, Palestinian Israelis, are denied visas to go to Arab countries. We were denied entry into Egypt by the Egyptian government. A lot of our players, especially refugees, are banned from going through the border into Jordan. We have a default extra fee we have to pay because we cannot fly from Israel. Our airport was destroyed by the Israeli military in 2001. And so we have to fly out of Jordan. So there's an extra $100 fee that we have to pay as Palestinian players, just because we don't have our own airport and we cannot fly out of Israel. So this is like, when we do our budgeting, we have to add $100 per player just to travel from Palestine to Jordan to fly. The biggest hindrance for us has been financial, aside from the political reality. I saw that someone, I think Zane, shared the link to our donation page. So we're trying to do a lot of work in creating some kind of sustainability through support and donation. We sell our merchandise as well that can help us. We have a website, givingloop.org/ultimatepalestine, to help us fund for our players. We had a team who got accepted to play in Windmill last year in the Netherlands, but because of the pandemic, it got canceled. We're still in the beginning of now taking that extra step to compete internationally and kind of take our level to the next, our playing to the next level. So hopefully, with your support and your encouragement and kind of the work we're doing, that we would be able to travel more and compete more in regional and global championships.
Excellent, thanks for that. Okay, do we have other questions? We have time for just
the question from Mylene. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing the name.
Maylin, yeah. Any organizations in the U.S.? Right. So, where do you want to direct people? The Giving Loop link is the one that is your preference.
So there's a link there from Giving Loop that was sent earlier. Okay. To answer your question, we are now in the process of getting registered in the U.S. as a non-for-profit organization. So that would help a lot in how we can do fundraising as well. We have been in touch with a number of organizations and teams. Molly Brown has been one of them and been an incredible supporter and friend of ours. And we're making connections with some players and coaches. So there's a lot of work that can be done still, whether it's to have coaches from the US or from Europe or anywhere in the world come and visit in Palestine and have these kind of trips where we play ultimate, do some tourism to the holy sites and engage with the political reality. Or hopefully at some point, if we can bring players to Sweden, to Germany, to the US, to Britain, and allow that kind of networking that can happen and also empower and give the chance to our players to compete internationally. So we're open for business. If there's any way you think we can support what we're doing, I included my email address and I'll type it now here as well, the email address of Ultimate Palestine, and we can would love to talk and think of ways we can work together.
Okay, amazing. Okay, let's do just one more question was, if you have time, how do you coach anti-normalization and politics off the field? I'm going to assume this is perhaps in the context of with our teams and communities.
Yeah, so that's a good question. We are trying to deal with this in a constructive way. We are realizing there are organizations that are active in Palestine and Israel that have been influential in the way they do politics and sports and make the split between them. We are fundamentally an athletic organization. And like I shared with you, it's very hard for us to just be an athletic organization because we have to be accountable to our players. We are in the beginning of kind of creating that voice for us and to speak up about these issues. We have not been dealing with politics on the ground as much. We have addressed it, I think, in different ways, especially with our Gazan players, especially when things happen, when we're having conversations with our players. But in a systematic way, it's not happened yet on the ground. We are now in this kind of the conference, and I'm just super grateful for Melissa and what she's doing. Is a way for us, has provided a platform for us where we can finally, being given that space where we can speak about these issues. So we're doing this right now. I'm doing this right now with you to think about politics and anti-normalization together. And I think there's a lot of work that can be done where we can come together and think about these things in a creative and a way that brings honor and dignity to our players and all of us around the world who are dealing with these issues that impact them in a big way, and where sports has that beautiful potential to play a huge role in challenging systems of oppression and empowering the youth and the young to speak up and to deal with issues of politics, of social, economic disparity, and also dealing with some sensitive issues like anti-Semitism. How can we teach our Palestinian players to be strong advocates against anti-Semitism, which is a huge problem? How do you expect the Palestinian to speak about these issues? But our struggle against racism is the same struggle, like I said this before, against any form of discrimination, whether it's against Jews, against Muslims, against Blacks. So we are all in this together, and there's a lot that can be done. And I welcome the challenge. And let's get together and let's do it together.
Amazing. Yeah, I think those are excellent parting words. Let's work together and let's do it together. What other choice do we have? All right. So we've got some applauses. Really powerful presentation. Lots of thanks. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone that's taking time out of your day to learn, to listen, to educate yourself. And as we're saying this week, get inspired, get some knowledge, and get to work. Just want to remind you, we've got another presentation coming up later this evening for those of you in North America. Going to be 8 a.m. in the morning for me with Alex Davis, where we're going to talk about more like an organizational perspective, what we're doing after the pandemic. We're going to be talking about issues of thinking about financial stability for our ultimate organizations. And if you haven't been to an Alex Davis talk before, get ready. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be analytical, and it's going to be very detailed yet clear. It's going to be great. So I'm super excited for that. And also, as we're talking about Oh man. Okay, we've got a lot of other great talks coming up. I'm just going to refer you to the email tomorrow instead of like saying what we've got. But we've got Jimmy. So I saw you're here on this presentation. Appreciate you being here. We're going to hear from Jimmy tomorrow as well, I believe, about the Ultimate Spirit program. So that's going to be great. And yeah, lots of other great stuff coming tomorrow. Again, just want to remind you, if you want to continue your education as a coach, please join us. You're invited to join us as part of the Ultimate Athletics Project Coaching Classroom. We have a special going on till the end of today where you can join for just $150 for the year. You get access to all the recordings. You're going to get access to the slides from this presentation, slides from other presentation, additional resources, and then also our community of coaches where you can continue these conversations together. So I hope that you will consider joining us. If you have any questions about that program, please do email me and I'll try to get back to you before the end of the day. All right, so that's it. Thank you so much, and I will see you again online soon.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you.